The Eagles are the better team, and the Eagles are going to win the Super Bowl. Welcome back to another episode of Eagles Edge. I'm here solo, just gonna talk Eagles-Cowboys. So we'll wait for some people to come in. I have nothing prepared today. If you're interested in reading my thoughts on the game, I've wrote 3,000 words. You can find it on Reddit. You can find it on Patreon. But I really want to just see what the fans are feeling about this game, answer your questions live. Anything else that just comes up organically, we'll discuss. But you know, football's back. Preseason was pretty brutal. We had the first game we learned some stuff, but after that we didn't learn too much. So it's going to be great to finally see some of the good players actually out on the field. Throughout the season, I'm going to be creating the matchup cards for every game. I'm going to be doing the game previews for every game and subsequent episodes where we'll include a lot more film that's going to be relevant to this year's team and the opponents. And Sam will be joining as well. So we have some people coming in here. What's up, Krabby? Got Lil as well. Are the question you ask anything? It doesn't have to be about Eagles, Cowboys. I'm here. I've got, like I said, I've got nothing prepared. I got no mailbags, no talking points. Anything you guys want to talk about, let's talk about. Um, could be about other games, general football discussion, or this matchup. As some questions are coming in, I will just kind of talk about the game. Cowboys have a new play caller, moving from McCarthy to Schottenheimer. Now, Schottenheimer was the offensive coordinator last year, but presumably more involved in the weekly game plan, team meetings, such, but not as much with actual play calling, obviously. Now, he's been an offensive coordinator many times for several teams, notably with Seattle. There are years where they were super heavy run, like fourth in the league in run. Then 2 years after that, they were like 29th in the league in run. So he switched it up, often suiting his run pass ratio to his personnel. Of course, it's circumstantial as well. Like if you're a dominant team, you're just going to run because you're leading more often. It's one of the pitfalls for statistics in general. Every single time I do a project, I'm like, yeah, but what is the situational context and how is that skewing the data? And really, what you have is this fundamental problem with football where if you try to filter down to something like very granular, like, oh, what does the team do on 3rd and 5+ between the 25s, but only against good opponents when the score is within 2 scores? So you're trying to throw out this noise. Well, you're left with 19 plays. Well, how are you supposed to extrapolate from 19 plays? So then you need multi-season data. Oh, but then the team has changed. Different coach, different players. So you end up with statistics with giant error bars. And that's the problem with NFL analytics. Not what people say is, oh, you're a numbers guy. You never played the game. You don't know what you're talking about. The problem is there's not enough, the data is not robust enough to make predictions upon that. That's where you have to use the other contextual factors, the film, actually understanding the players and coaches, and that helps give more context to the numbers that you're seeing. All right, we got some questions coming in here. Krabby, how will the Cowboys approach defense with the recent changes, i.e., the Parsons trade? So on defense, they also have a new a new coordinator. Matt Eberflus, people will know him from Chicago. He was much less involved in the defense, from what I understand, than he was previously when he was a defensive coordinator. And that's just obvious. Like, the head coach's duties are different. But Chicago, they had stretches where they, relative to their talent level, they were respectable defense. The stats will say otherwise. But one of the things, going back to what I said earlier about how situations skew football numbers, when you have a offense that goes 3 and out over and over again, and then you're playing from behind and you're losing the field position battle and you're losing the turnover battle, it's going to make the defensive metrics look much worse than they would be otherwise. It's one of the things when I jumped on Full Command, which is a new Commanders podcast with this guy, Grant Mitchell, who's fantastic. And we're going to link up again later in the season when we play the Commanders. And we talked about how with Jaden Daniels, they had this infrastructure in place. It wasn't just, let's throw a bunch of receivers out there with him. In Chicago, Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen. Like, they've got the guys. It didn't work at all. Versus the Commanders, much less potent receiving room, but the pieces around him are better, like better offensive line. Although I don't think Chicago was as bad as people may have think if you looked at the sack numbers. Much better offensive system. Like, in my opinion, from what I watched on film with Chicago, that was the worst offensive system I've ever watched. It didn't seem like they had any clue what they were doing. Guys just running 30 yards downfield, not even turning around. Once the first read is taken away, you get like basically turn into backyard ball. And then, even though the Commanders' defense wasn't that good, they brought in some of those veterans, and they were a lot better than they would have been had they not brought in the Wagners, the Luvus, the Lattimores. And that really helped Daniels succeed, because if he was playing from like 2 scores behind a lot, and then they have 0 run game, and they're always backed up, it may have been a different story. That said, let me actually answer the question here. I think, you look at this defensive depth chart. Eberflus is a guy who, like I said, he'll mold what he does to his personnel. But generally, he's a rush 4 guy. He's not a heavy blitzer. He's never been that. I feel confident to say he won't be a heavy blitzer this year. If you're going to talk about sim pressures, which is you're bringing second-level players to pass rush, but then you're replacing them with a guy on the line. So you end up only bringing 4, but it's just changing who is rushing and who is dropping. He could definitely do that. He tends to be zone heavy. Now, you look at Diggs on the outside, even Elam, Bland, and those safeties, you immediately think like they're better suited for man coverage. But if you don't have a potent pass rush, I don't care how good your corners are. Good luck playing a heavy dose of man, because even Patrick Surtain can't cover for 6 seconds. So it's going to be heavy zone. I think, it's going to give the opportunity for their secondary to get diced up. They're going to be leaving a lot of space in these, basically, unless they have this pass rush cooking, guys will naturally find soft spots in zones, and they don't have the guys who are like instinctive or rangy enough to close those voids. I mean, between Leofau and Murray Jr., those are way below average in terms of middle of the field, like hook zone type defenders. Diggs and Elam on the outside, my guess is, they'll probably play a fair bit of cover 2, and they're going to try to steal some of these underneath routes, see if they can get some picks that way. But I don't think the safeties are rangy enough to kind of play over the top of those guys very effectively, and I think they're going to give up a lot of big plays. Eberflus is a good defensive coordinator, but you can't overcome bad personnel. We saw with Flores the first year with Minnesota, they were not that good. Fangio's had years where he was like 25th, 26th ranked defense. And you could go down the list of all the good defensive coordinators. You know, without the horses, you can't really play that good. What I do expect is if they're going to, you know, it's not like he's just going to be like, oh, too bad. We don't have a pass rush. We're screwed. Heavy doses of stunts, twists. They have guys who can do that. Odigizua, Clark, Solomon Thomas. These are potentially potent pass rush threats in the inside. I believe they're getting Sam Williams back. Someone should fact check me on this. And when he was healthy, he had a really high pass rush win rate. And this is an edge rusher. So that's a name to keep your eye on, is Sam Williams, because he was like over 22% pass rush win rate, but he missed all of 2024. So they're going to need those guys on the inside. And I think they can cause issues. Like, I'm looking at Juergens / Steen / if Dickerson doesn't play week 1 versus Odigizua, and that's a tough matchup. He's really quick laterally, plays with great pad level, violent rusher, and that's like the archetype of the guy who would give those players problems. I mean, even Dickerson to a degree, like Dickerson's run blocking may be the best in the NFL. And I charted for a guard, and I charted that he had the most key blocks on Saquon's 10+ yard runs last year. And he was just able to work up to the second level fairly often, absolutely eliminate guys and torque guys on the line out of the gaps and create big room for him. But in the pass protection, there was times where they had like some delayed stunts that gave him problems. Sometimes if they slid away, he would not even ID a rusher who came a little bit later. So, I mean, he did give up some pressures. All right. Got lots more questions here. Talk about Steen and Sidney Brown starting. You know, when we talked with Matt Limegrover, the former Penn State offensive line coach, you know, he said, if you got one guy who's potentially a weak link, you can manage that. You can scheme around it. You can give him help. It's really when you have two guys where you're in dire straits. So if Dickerson's healthy, I don't really worry. And not just healthy, but playing, because we know he's not healthy. I think I'm not that worried about Steen. Is he going to create giant Mack truck sized holes by throwing guys out of the club like Becton? No. But is he going to be able to get to the perimeter, reach block better, pull, and work out in space better than Becton? Yeah. Is he going to be better at communicating stunts on the inside in pass pro? I think he will be. Will he be better at blocking like shifty interior defensive guys like in the Kalijah Cantu mold? Yes, I think he will be. So it's going to be a trade-off with what he provides versus Becton, but I'm not overly concerned at this point. Sidney Brown, I'm a little more concerned about. Fangio's talked positively about him and said he's come, a pretty long way. We know he plays pretty crazy. And that was one of the bugaboos for Gardner Johnson, is that, he's just trying to make every play and sometimes takes himself out of position. The type of play I really worry about, sometimes I just have visions of plays that I think guys could get victimized by, is let's just keep it specific to this Cowboys game. You're gonna sometimes when Pickens is gonna go deep, you're gonna have him like working against quarters. So Brown's gonna be an inside quarter, and then you got either Adoree Jackson or Quinyon Mitchell in the quarter next to him. And sometimes you feel comfortable because you're like, oh, maybe we only have one vertical route on our side of the field, and we got two deep quarters. We're good. But sometimes both of those players kind of relax because they feel like, okay, we've got this guy completely sandwiched. Quarterback's going to look away. We're good. But you'll see on film, it happens probably once per week where a team will dial up a deep post and it'll split the two defenders and they just go over the top for a big touchdown. And I could imagine Sidney Brown and Adoree kind of bracketing a Pickens deep post, and they're kind of relaxed for 1 second, and then it's just over the top, and they're caught napping. Um, in terms of spinning down in the run game, I think he'll be great. Maybe you could even launch a safety blitz. Um, so with Edgerrin Cooper, this was a guy who I had big reservations about when he came out of the draft. But Jeff Hafley in Green Bay, he insulated him by having him be like a torpedo, just a pure attacking player. Sometimes he would cover players deep downfield, but mostly in man coverage. Nothing like, overly nuanced in the run fits or coverage asks. And it weaponized him and made him great. And the reason I bring that up is because that's what you can do with Sidney Brown. Like, I think the more you can ask him to do things that he's good at, play aggressively downhill, closer to the box, simple keys for him to read, that's conducive to success. But I don't necessarily want him like as the weak safety opposite of 3-by-1 and having to figure out how to like match routes properly that way. So with all this stuff, it's never like, I think the guy's good, I think the guy's bad. It's like, here are the things I think he's good at, here are the things he's bad at. To what extent can the coaches mitigate those weaknesses in this specific matchup that they're in? Is it likely to come up? And ultimately, all of those things factor into how well or poorly a guy plays. All right. Moving on. Travis asks, you think the Cowboys are going to sell out on stopping the run like the Chiefs did in the Super Bowl? And I don't know what the definition of sell out is. If you're talking about put 7 and 8 men in the box frequently, I think it's a down and distance and field position thing. Let's say the Eagles receive the opening kickoff and it's 1st and 10 on the 30-yard line. I do expect the Cowboys to play a fairly heavy box. And I don't think it will matter because you look at who they have. It's just personnel. Like, they're light in the middle. They don't have great linebackers. Really, their only chance of stopping the run, in my opinion, is if they get these safeties as unblocked guys kind of running through lanes. Safeties are generally not accounted for in blocking assignments. So, and they have some guys who can come up and make plays, but that leaves you vulnerable like in play action scenarios. And I can't imagine they're going to be like very comfortable with their guys one-on-one on the outside versus Brown and Smith. So yes, in like neutral down situations, I think they'll play like 7-man boxes, but I think the Eagles will be able to run effectively anyway. And then I think they'll play light boxes in the pass situations, like call it 2nd and 8 plus, 3rd and 5 plus. And I think they're going to struggle. Does Britton Covey get a roster spot since they need a punt returner every week? My view of it is he will be the punt returner, and then they can kind of play that practice squad call up game a few times. And after that, maybe they figure out someone who is actually playing or on the 48 man to return kicks. Or someone, it just figures itself out. That's probably what will end up happening. One random guy will get hurt, and then he just has a spot. You just know they don't want to put DeJean back there. But there are other guys who maybe can do it. Some of the defensive backs. Like, I'm sure you could put, if you wanted to, you could probably put Sidney Brown back there. You could, Adoree Jackson used to do that earlier in his career. Yeah, hopefully no DeJean at punt return. I agree. I thought Covey was already released. Was he? So he's on the practice squad as of 5 hours ago. So we'll see. He's not released, to my knowledge. Travis asks, what's your score prediction? I would invite you to look at my matchup preview article. You can go on Twitter. If you want to go on the Patreon, you can find it there. If you don't want to sign up there, you can go on Reddit. And I posted my score prediction there with 3,000 words of analysis. And it was 30-17 Eagles. What's going on, Coach? Coach Lombard. Throw a question our way if you're interested. By the way, if anyone is on Twitter and you want to ask a question, just head over to YouTube. I believe only the YouTube questions show up in my chat. All right. Vishal asks, you mentioned in your matchup preview that Eagles struggle in the scramble drill. What goes into the scramble drill, making the scramble drill a success that the Eagles aren't doing correctly? And that's actually something I've posted about as well. And you could probably find a thread on Twitter. It's a multitude of things, namely the receivers working back to the quarterback. I think a lot of times once Hurts starts scrambling, their routes will kind of fizzle out and they'll just kind of drift as opposed to like aggressively trying to work back to the quarterback. A common scramble drill philosophy is that each player should occupy a part of the field. So let's just say you're scrambling out to the right. You have a guy who's kind of in the flats, working in the flats. You have a guy in the intermediate, and then you have a guy go deep. I think it's total crap. Number one, I don't recall if Hurts ever has made a deep throw in kind of a full sprint scenario in either direction. That's just not part of his game. So what does having the guy go deep really do? Create more room for the guy underneath him? Not really. You don't really want to cut back across the field because everyone knows throwing across the field is a recipe for an interception. But what I think really is what you don't really see on film, what they could do is just start running towards him. But turn everything into like a comeback wherever you are, and that could bear fruit. If you're someone who's already lingering by the line of scrimmage, that's the type of player who could start going deep. So let's just say Saquon flares out to the flat, A linebacker's got him. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Hurts starts scrambling to the right. Well, now Saquon can take off and potentially beat the linebacker down the sidelines. That actually happened in the Super Bowl. The exact play I'm talking about. Scramble drill. Saquon went vertical and beat a guy down the sidelines, and they got a nice gain off of it. The other thing is, like, are you scrambling to run or are you scrambling to throw? So you'll see some of the best quarterbacks who are on the run, they got the ball, and like Mahomes, for example, he's literally pump faking perpetually. Like there's something wrong with his arm because he's going to have one of two things. Either he's going to have the coverage declare themselves. So it's like he's going to move the guy with a pump fake and potentially create space to get it to one of his receivers. Or more often, he's going to freeze the guy or get them off their feet and he's able to run. And sometimes when he's 8-10 yards past the line of scrimmage, he's still pump faking and guys are frozen. It's like they can't overcome that instinct. Whereas you don't see Hurts do that. Hurts is running out to the outside and he's got the ball tucked. Or if it's in his arm, he's running, throws it away. So, if he just had it in a more ready to throw position, eyes downfield, not necessarily in a full sprint, he'd have that opportunity. But as I wrote before, he's much better running anyway. So I don't necessarily know how much value he's going to create, like by improving what he can do in the scramble drill. That said, I continually compare Hurts to 2018 Russell Wilson, and he added a tremendous amount of value by creating in the scramble drill. So it's possible. The thing is, Wilson was a baseball pitcher, and those guys tend to be way better in the scramble drill. The Mahomes was a baseball pitcher. Kyler Murray. They're just able to deliver better passes and kind of keep their eyes downfield in those scenarios. All right, got more questions here. Coach asks, on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried are you about Pickens going off versus Adoree? So what I expect is that he'll play with a large cushion. So what's that? Like a lot of times you watch the Cowboys from last year, and if they'd have kind of what I'd call like a conversion route or an alert, where if the guy's playing off, and so you have a guy spread on the outside, if the guy's playing off, I either run a hitch or I push up to him and I run a comeback. But if the guy's pressed up, I'm running a go. And I could see that being something that the Cowboys do. So if Adoree's 10 yards off against Pickens, kind of in a one-on-one scenario, and are they going to run hitches and potentially slants? Yes, I think. And then that's where you got to just rally up and tackle. Pickens is a much better yak threat than given credit for. He's got a really interesting style. He's got great ball carrier vision. He'll leap over diving tackles. He's fast. And so it's something to be aware of. I don't necessarily expect, like, it wouldn't make sense for them to like press up with Adoree against Pickens. That's just asking to get beat over the top. The one scenario where I'd be comfortable with that is when he's just jamming him. Either it's press bail or he's just in a cover 2, like a split field coverage where he's just jamming him, carries him for like 5 to 7 yards, and then he releases him to the safety. Totally good with that. So, my real concern is, like I mentioned earlier, for people who are just joining, a deep post where he thinks he's got help deep inside with Sidney Brown or even Blankenship because he's not have great long speed, and they both are like, okay, he's got him, I've got him. They relax for a second, and all of a sudden it's over the top. That's where I'd be worried. All right. T. Grant asks, what zone coverages are typically used when having a cornerback follow one receiver? I know cover 6 and 8 can be used for bracketing a guy, but would you have Mitchell follow wide receiver 1? All right, let me just freeze this on the screen. Okay, so Fangio zone coverages. There's a lot of them. Some of them are outright calls. So you can come out and you can have a coverage call like Zeus or stuffing, where it's outright signaling a receiver by their jersey number and it's morphing the coverage based off that player's alignment. So what you mentioned, cover 6 and cover 8. So Zeus would do something like this, where if they're like if they're on the outside, they play cover 2 to that side. So if, let's just say, they called Zeus 88, they'd play cover 2 if CeeDee Lamb is on the outside to his side. And then if he was in the slot, they would play quarters to that side. Then there are tags and calls that the players can make on the field itself to bracket a guy. Like if there's some kind of unorthodox formation, like a bunch quads type deal, they can make checks like that. Oftentimes those are built into the calls themselves. But yeah, so like some of the doubling terminology, like you'll hear cut, cone, bracket. There's a lot of them, and generally, like it's either like all it's saying is who's on the outside, who's on the inside. Is it the nickel on the outside, and then they're funneling everything to the safety on the inside, or the opposite, or the opposite? Like generally with a corner, like a corner would be playing outside leverage and then funneling to a safety inside, and sometimes, and then the nickel could play inside leverage and then they'd funnel to the safety outside. So there's a lot of ways to play it. There's ones where if the player in motion automatically gets doubled, and that's something that I think would be relevant, because Schottenheimer is a guy who's on the record saying, I love motion and shifts. So I expect a steady diet of motion and shifts. And a lot of people talk about how these will give man zone indicators, and they will. But more often than not, they're used to attack leverage and simplify coverage calls. Because let's say on any given play, you've got, 8 to 10 base coverage calls. Well, if you're facing a bunch formation or a fast motion, that might go down to 3. So automatically, there's less options for the defense how they're going to respond to that. And that's where it comes down to execution. But yeah, Fangio has calls where it's like, if CeeDee Lamb goes in motion, that's an automatic double. And one of the routes they used a lot last year, and I wrote about this, is when Lamb, let's just say there's one receiver opposite him, and if the guy is condensed and they motion Lamb over, he will run a speed out because there's so much room to the sidelines. But if the guy is wide and they motion him into the slot, they'll run like an option route where he's got space to either turn around, work inside, or work back outside. And they'll just clear out the outside receiver. I can't imagine that the Cowboys are going to show a complete overhaul offense this year because the offensive coordinator became the head coach. And he talked about how 70% of their verbiage is the same and they added some flavor. So, how they deployed Lamb, I expect a good amount of carryover from last year. And I thought a lot of the time they telegraphed exactly what he was going to do based off his alignment, based off the motions and shifts. Now, it's not like in Madden where if you know it's coming, you're going to definitely stop it. That's not how it works. Ultimately, it's about execution. There were times where teams knew the Legion of Boom was going to play free match like 60% of the plays, and it still worked amazing because it's a sound coverage. There are no inherent flaws. You can't just design some magical route combination to shred it if you know it's coming. It's not like a fastball and baseball down the middle. If you know it's coming, most players are going to hammer it. The way the coverage is designed, it's not supposed to have any holes. And if you distribute the routes properly, you should have everything covered. Now, there are certain route combinations, formations that can stress a defense and conflict a zone defender and out leverage them, but ultimately it does come down to those small advantages as opposed to, oh, I know what coverage is coming, I can just scheme this guy wide open. That's not really realistic. All right. Vishal says, awesome explanation. Thank you. I appreciate that. For those who are just joining, we're just taking questions. Could be on anything. But specifically, if you're interested in the Eagles-Cowboys game, whatever questions you may have there. Coach Lombard asks, wouldn't Keely Ringo be better at press bail and cover 2 than Adoree? So for those who have been following, I originally predicted Ringo would win the starting job. Obviously, that has not transpired. And if you look at his film, he has very defined strengths and weaknesses. I've talked about it a lot. As a vertical athlete, as someone coming up playing physically, he's good. As a lateral athlete, he's bad. And the question is, to what extent can they mitigate those weaknesses? And when you're in the slot, I think it's more manageable. I mean, like, candidly, I thought the biggest weakness of Cooper DeJean coming out was lateral agility. And you could see it on film when he got up against fleet-footed receivers who could make quick lateral cuts, he would give up separation. And that actually happened last year. But they didn't really ask him to do that. They didn't ask him, all right, you got Zay Flowers in a condensed formation and man coverage, and he can go other way, and you just got to mirror him. They rarely ever asked him to do that stuff. And a few times he got beat doing that. Adam Thielen beat him in man coverage. Jamar Chase, even though he had a great game against Cincinnati, beat him on a angle type route. But if you just ask him, hey, whoever's the number 2 receiver, I want you to just give them the biggest reroute they've ever felt, just absolutely crush them coming off their release. And then I want you to use elite zone eyes to either work to the flat and rob passes to the number 1, or identify that the number 2 threat over the middle and you're going to just take him away, or even in the Super Bowl, identify a threat coming across the field, double back and make an interception. That's where he's amazing. And all that to say, it's harder to do that on the outside. What are you going to do? You can have a guy play underneath them, So whether it's the nickel or the weak side linebacker playing aggressively to the flats so that they can play deep and that can help them. You can have them play up and have the safety capping. But why don't you want to do that? Because you're giving away valuable resources that you'd rather use for other stuff. You'd rather the safety help on a vertical crossing route. You'd rather the safety take away the tight end. You'd rather the weak side linebacker just cover the running back, whether if he's just on like a swing route or a check down. Or if the running back stays in the block, he can blitz or he can add and be an extra hook zone. So you know, it's all about resource allocation, and you don't want to have to do that. If the players can just play ISO on the outside, that's ideal. And clearly the Eagles think Adoree can play without help more effectively than Ringo. And they have a lot more evidence to believe that than I do because they see him every single day. And Ringo has like less than 200 defensive snaps in his career. So it doesn't surprise me. In terms of the specific assignments you mentioned, press bail, there were times early in his career that Ringo had slow feet. He was so like convicted and focused on getting a good jam, his feet would be frozen. And then if he didn't get good hands on the guy, he was slow to open up. He'd get beat, then he'd be grabbing on the guy. Then he got a little better with his feet. And against lesser receivers, he was able to erase them because he's huge and fast. And a quarterback looking over there sees that and he's like, okay, that guy's not open, moves on. But against good receivers, like you watch him against Chris Olave, even if he managed pretty well off the line, he's a panic cornerback who would open up prematurely, let guys get in his blind spot, be slow to flip his hips, and then be grabbing anyway. And he wasn't good at understanding where his help was. And I think between potentially having a low football IQ, I can only speculate, and playing with a lack of confidence, those two things could be the nail in the coffin for him. But if you put a guy, I'm trying to think, like a Jalen Mills. Some people brought up this on social media. If you put Jalen Mills' brain inside Keely Ringo, that would be a better player. For those who are just coming in, we're just taking questions. Head over to YouTube. I posted the link on Twitter, and you can ask the questions there. We appreciate all of them. T asks, is this the year of A.J. Brown if the Birds see a lot of single high to stop Saquon? And I love this question. So I did a study on Hurts, and my conclusion was he's pretty slow to get the ball out against two high zone coverages. And when he does, it's not that great. And why don't teams play more too high? If they all obviously all know that, well, they don't want to be outmanned in the trenches and let Saquon get up to speed. But I don't think it's an either or calculus. I don't think it's, do I have to pick between two high zone and single high man, and that's the difference between stopping the run or pass. And whatever I pick, I'm going to be wrong. I don't think that has to be the calculus. Now, you have to have the right personnel, especially guys like one of the big advantages with the Eagles is they can play in nickel and they can morph into a pretty like stout run formation. like defensive structure. So, you add Zach Bond to the edge, you move the other linebacker to the middle, you bring DeJean down a little bit closer and more inside, and like suddenly you've got like a 7-man box with a safety spinning down with guys who are physical, and it works, especially if you have Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter in the inside. Or you can play the wide nines, you drop Bond and Campbell, you put DeJean in a quarter flat, and now you've got a really great pass defense. And what an advantage that is. Whereas some teams don't have that luxury, and they have this paradoxical decision of what are we going to try to stop? And the teams that tried to stop the pass got annihilated by Saquon. And then the Chiefs tried to stop Saquon with everything they have, and they got annihilated through the air. But I think there are other defenses out there that could do both. I think you have to have the threat of pressure. Some of these double mug and amoeba fronts where you're putting 6 and 7 man on the line of scrimmage cause problems for the Eagles pass game. And that's a way of artificially getting more players in the box. So there's a potential that you could defend the run and the pass from those formations. But if you're putting light linebackers in the A gaps, you're probably not going to stop the run. So what I would do is I would put my horses in the A gaps, and then I'd walk my linebackers and probably my nickel up to the line of scrimmage more outside. Call it like the C gaps, B, C gaps, and then put the nickel outside everyone. Then you have the ability to not get blown off the ball in the inside. You bring pressure, and you still have players on the outside who can hold up and scrape to the sidelines and make tackles. Now, how many times can you do that in a game? I don't know. Todd Bowles probably tells you 60% of the game. And it's amazing how they gave the Eagles fits every time. One play that comes to mind was they blitzed from the right side. Eagles had a screen to Paris Campbell to the left. This is against Tampa Bay. But Bowles took the linebacker on the behind the side of the blitz and ran him across the formation, which is very unorthodox. And they got like 1 yard gain, and Hurts was furious. So I do think it's possible, but there's a lot of things that need to be in place to be able to defend the Eagles' run and pass game. And sometimes, even if you have the guys in position, you'll still get out executed. And that's the benefit of having a bunch of all pros on your offensive line and one of the greatest running backs of all time running behind him, and a quarterback threat to run. Another thing is, if I were trying to game plan against the Eagles zone read, I would say make Hurts keep it every single time, but make him run laterally to the outside. When he gets north-south, he'll dice you. But ever since 2023, he doesn't have that ability to have that quick cut back. He used to be able to put his foot in the ground and absolutely juke a guy in the open field. He doesn't do that anymore. So I would try to just string him out to the sidelines, and I think they'd have more success that way. But you definitely don't want to let him hand it off. Little says, I'm a big fan of Eagles season. Eagles better kick the Cowboys' butts. And I think they have a great chance. The Cowboys defense, there's no reason to believe that they should be good at stopping the run. The only team with like a lackluster defense that was able to slow down the Eagles' run game was Washington in one of those games. And I'm talking about Saquon specifically because in the game I'm referencing, I think they still had 200 total rush yards with all the players. But you could see times where they're combo blocking up front and they'd get overzealous working up to the second level and they'd let these defensive tackles or ends penetrate and stop Saquon at the line of scrimmage. That's the only hope. If the Cowboys interior defensive line can shed blocks if a Eagles interior defense offensive lineman tries to work up to Murray and Leafau prematurely, that's where they could slow Saquon down. But if they get him in space with these guys working downhill, the offensive line working up to the second and third level, I think the Cowboys are completely cooked. And I don't think Elam has a prayer in hell of stopping A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith. He's terrible. Oh, he's not a good cornerback, especially when he's isolated, especially in man coverage. He got picked on by the Chiefs when he had to come in and replace Christian Benford. So if the Eagles can get some isolation opportunities against Elam on the outside, I think they're going to have a lot of success. On the other side of the ball, Cowboys don't have an explosive run game. They've got a mediocre at best offensive line and one of the least explosive running back groups I've seen in the last couple of years. Ironically, you could say the same thing about the Broncos last year, and they brought in their lead back. Like, it is absolutely absurd that they have Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders as their top two backs. Jaden Blue's the only guy with any juice, and he's presumably third on their depth chart, going to be used as like a gadget back. And he's not a well-rounded back at all. So even though he does have he's more of a home run threat, he's more kind of like a Shipley type guy where you have to create a giant hole for him to do anything. So if Schottenheimer is a guy who, in my opinion, wants to play physical, probably establish some level of ground game in order to run a lot of under center play action. Well, under center play action is not going to be as potent if teams are like, we could just play 6-man boxes and you're not going to punish us for more than 3 or 4 yards anyway. And we know you're going to either go to Pickens deep or CeeDee Lamb underneath. It's like you're almost like your roster composition makes you predictable by its very nature. And I don't view Schottenheimer as one of these like ultra innovative, progressive offensive designers or play callers that he's going to be able to deploy his guys in ways that are unexpected, like you could see with Liam Cohen. All right, got some more comments here. Daryl says, running the football and stopping the run is always a must in football. Teams are too smart to let a QB beat them playing arena football on grass. The problem is most teams is committing to the run game. This is obviously, a topic that's been discussed ad nauseum in the football circle. And people say, well, look at teams who run the most and they win the most. And then someone comes in and goes, yeah, they're running the most because they're ahead. And then you hear stats about play action is just as good, whether your run game is good or not. And then obviously Eagles fans, it's ironic how they've been begging the Eagles to run the ball for years and years and years and having the most pass-heavy play callers the league's ever seen for a decade. And then they finally run the ball the most in the league, more than 50%. I think there are only 2 teams in the entire NFL who did that last year. And they win the Super Bowl. And they have an extremely potent run game. And that's only going to invigorate the run the ball people But the reason it was the right thing to do is because they had an unbelievable run game. It's because they had a great defense where it behooves you to play ball control type game where you're out possessing the other team, and you're probably eschewing efficiency for the sake of reducing the total number of possessions. So there's less variance, less turnovers because you're less likely to turn it over when you run it than pass it. And if you think you're the better team, you want to reduce variance. Vishal asks, which rookies do you think will see meaningful action versus the Cowboys, and what do you expect from them? Jahad Campbell, I expect him to start and play essentially the entire game. And I was extremely high on Campbell coming out. I had him as one of 5 blue chip players in the draft. But obviously, I didn't think the Eagles would be targeting a linebacker in the first round. I thought they'd go after an edge rusher because it was chock full of edge rushers. But maybe the edge rushers they liked didn't fall to 32, 31. So they're just like, okay, we're just going to take the best player available. We saw how Fangio was able to weaponize Bond. Presumably, if Bond goes down or in 3 years he's gone, you want another Bond. And maybe he has edge rushing chops in the future. And so all those things align to say, like, all right, this is a great pick. And then I went back probably a month and a half ago, and I was like, all right, let me watch the film again and really try to get into the nitty gritty. And I saw 2 notable weaknesses. So one is that he's bad at block destruction. So this is just a term to describe when you're engaging generally with an offensive lineman, but sometimes a tight end. What is your mechanisms for beating that block? So for him, he basically tries to jump around it. So it'll either just be he's completely dipping around the guy, or more often he's kind of swiping him across and then moving laterally the opposite way. And he's good at that. And that's effective and that works. But when it doesn't work and the guy gets hands on him, he plays with this high pad level. He's already fairly tall and he's high cut, and he can just get completely erased. And you'll see sometimes, like, if he comes in and he tries to deliver like a good blow with his hands, he can cause some knockback, but it's just that initial pop because he's got this explosive power, but it's not sustained. So basically, what happens in that scenario is if you don't have sustained drive, the lineman can basically keep working up the field, and that creates space for running backs to run behind. Whereas some like bigger, you could think of like a Landon Roberts, where he'll come up, absolutely bulldoze the offensive lineman, and now there's no crease because he's just been shoved back to the line of scrimmage. And when he is latched on to offensive linemen, he has the laser vision on the linemen themselves. He should be looking at the ball carrier. All of the best players are looking past the guy trying to block them. If you're rushing the quarterback, you're looking at the quarterback, and the offensive lineman is in your peripheral, and you are just being like, get away from me. And so that you can have the most efficient rush path to the quarterback. Because if you beat a guy clean, but the quarterback's over there, well, then it doesn't matter. And you'll watch videos of like Von Miller where it's camera view is behind the quarterback, slow motion, high definition, and he doesn't even see the offensive lineman. All of his focus is trained on the quarterback, and this guy's just in his peripheral. And that extrapolates to linebackers as well in the run game, where you need to have good eye discipline, understanding where the ball carrier is actually at, and not get hyper focused on the lineman trying to block you. And the second thing is that when he's kind of backpedaling, it's awkward. He tends to chop his feet too fast. And I like having active feet. But if it's too rapid, it actually freezes you. It doesn't allow you, like, soft legs up on your toes and a little bit of a hop to it. Amazing. Now I can break either way. Kind of like a defensive player in the NBA, right? But if you're like this, running in place, which you'll see Campbell do at times, it makes it harder to move to where you want to be. And that will happen in his back pedal, where he'll get high and he'll chop his feet rapidly, and it'll make it so when he goes to try to open up his hips and turn a direction, it doesn't happen as smoothly as it should. Now, as soon as he's working linearly, it's like he's shot out of a cannon. So for a guy who, when he's going sideline to sideline, is probably as fast as any linebacker you'll ever see, you'd expect him to be at least good at covering the ground when he's backpedaling and opening up his hips at like a 45. But he's kind of like average in that department. So there's a lot of meat on the bone there. I think he'll get there, but it's something to note. I expect good things from him. We talked about it earlier with Edgerrin Cooper, how Jeff Hafley insulated him with the coverage assignments and the blitzing and everything he asked of him. And I think they can do that with Campbell. Whip pressure is a staple. So that's when you could 4-man line, you bring Campbell, you drop the edge opposite. And teams will often slide their protection. So you got three men on one side, sliding to Jalen Carter's side. That's 2-on-2 on the opposite side. Oh, but now you got Jihad Campbell. So what happens in those scenarios? One of two things. Either the running back is supposed to pick him up, and that is an advantage for Campbell, or the quarterback is hot. And often they're going to be hot to the side where that edge is already dropping. So that has a high likelihood of being effective when the Eagles use it. And I think he'll be good at zone coverage in general, aside from the type of stuff I talked about, where, if he's got to like widen out to the sideline and then work up to the line of scrimmage, I think he'll be pretty good, because once he's working north-south, his speed's unbelievable. And he's like a vacuum cleaner tackler. Like, I love his tackling. And that's rare to say for like a college linebacker. But if you're asking him to, if in like cover 3 match, if he has to take a slot receiver and then like open up and then carry them on a deep vertically crossing route, that's where he might be a little bit slow to kind of like flip his hips. But once he's in a direction, it's all systems go. Other rookies, I think Ty Robinson will get a few snaps. He's a high effort type of player. Pinball type rusher is a term I've used to describe him, which is he'll kind of just pinball off of the offensive line, and hopefully that last ricochet is towards the quarterback. So you have the opportunity to scheme him up in interior stunts. One of the things that the Fangio used very effectively with the Dolphins was interior pick stunts, some TT stunts. There's a variety of ways to do this, but one of the main ones, so they had Zach Sealer and Christian Wilkins, is one of the guys would immediately slant across, crash into the guard, and then the other guy would come around. And if you do that towards the side of the slide, sometimes you can get unblocked pressures directly up the middle. And those guys got like 10 sacks apiece. A lot of pressures on that exact thing. So when you talk about Ojomo, Ty Robinson, Jalen Carter, they are perfectly suited to destroy doing stuff like that. And you can predict where teams are going to slide because Carter is just such a high level talent. It's interesting. Like if I was going against the Eagles, I would try to think of like more clever ways to stay less predictable in my protection and not like expose myself to stunts like that. Some of the teams that had most success against Carter was Atlanta, who just deployed Lindstrom on an island against him, and the Chiefs, who did it with Trey Smith. Now, the edge rushers absolutely dominated, so it didn't matter. But like, for example, people say, well, look at what Milton Williams did. A lot of his production in the Super Bowl was because the edge rushers completely collapsed the pocket, and then Mahomes was trying to find an escape lane, and he self-sacked it directly into Milton Williams. So if you don't have a great right guard, you probably can't do that. But I just don't think it's sustainable to just play 3 to his side the entire game because Fangio will hit you with that whip pressure from the other side. He'll hit you with the interior stunt that'll make it worse than if you just played scat protection or just big on big and had everyone man up. All right. Conrad asks, which position does Howie most likely make a significant trade for? But it seems at this point it would happen, a few weeks into the season, presumably if they have a glaring weakness. A lot of people say corner. I'm still bullish on Bennett. Maybe I'm living in a pipe dream. I don't think the Eagles can achieve their potential with Adoree out there. And I hope he proves me wrong. But I do believe in Bennett. And because of that, I would say edge would be the position. After 2025, after this season, the Eagles have 2 edge rushers total signed to contracts. So they're going to be bringing 5 into the game tomorrow. So you do the math there, right? And one of them is a guy who only came on in the last part of the year, who was a converted safety. And as I love Hunt, but he sounds a lot better as like an edge 3 than he does an edge 2. And so I just could see Howie thinking, okay, how can we bolster this edge room? Now, maybe they just punt on that completely and they draft a guy in the first round or trade up for a guy they love next year. I don't know, but it's a very strange construction. Like, it's possible to argue that they don't have a single edge who fits the Fangio mold or what you would think of the Fangio mold, where you have 3 designated pass rushers as backups. You've got a converted safety and an undersized edge. And maybe that's what he likes now. Maybe he's like, all right, it's all nickel. We'd rather just have like guys who are highly mobile and physical, but not necessarily behemoths, because a lot of times in the past he'd play with like 265-pound edge rushers. Maybe that no longer exists. But, you know, the guy whose name has been floated out there was Trayvon Walker. If the Jags stumble out of the gates and decide, okay, he's not part of our future, he's got this year and next left on his contract, could they make an offer there? That's a guy who does fit the mold because he is big. And I think he's really good when rushing from a wide 9 alignment, which in the Eagles rush and cheat fronts, they use that. Trayvon Walker, he has no pass rush bag. So when you line him up closer, like a 5 technique to the end of the line, a lot of times his pass rush gets stymied, fizzles out, and what he would do is get a lot of hustle sacks and pressures. And then people are like, all of his sacks and pressures are hustles. So he stinks. But there's a few times where he's rushing out wide and he bulldozes the tackle, or he's able to use his athleticism to win the corner. And I like him there. And I like him in the run game because he's got these super long arms and he's powerful upper body, and he can just keep the offensive tackle at bay and ride them out and make the tackle. So I think he'd be a lot better in Philly than he is in Jaguars. And he's cost controlled for 2 years. So even if you say, screw it, I have zero intention of signing this guy long term, but I can get him for 60 cents on the dollar for those 1.5 years. If you trade for him in like week 5, that's interesting. Carl Granderson for the Saints. They're going to stink. The Saints are going to stink. So why do they need this, like, what is he, 28, 29-year-old edge rusher? 28 years old, makes absolutely no sense on their team. 6'5", 261. That's the type of player that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, edge rusher. All right, got a comment here from Drip Drip, and then we'll get out of here. Do you have your own YouTube channel? Actually, I do. I only have one old video on there that's got like millions of views. It's about a guy I know who beat Las Vegas and Atlantic City for millions and millions of dollars playing blackjack, but I have zero football content on there. So all my stuff is on Eagles Pinpole Network. Every week I do an article on the Patreon. So for the season, that'll be matchup previews, and then I will be having a podcast each week, recapping and previewing the next game. And then if you're not following me on Twitter, I post there all the time as well, stuff that is independent from those other outlets. So appreciate everyone stopping by. Go Birds, and we'll see you next time.